Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I'm Jessica Roberts, Business Relationship Manager for NCEA, and I'll be facilitating this webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A or chat windows. We will monitor the questions and try and answer all of them in the allotted time. At the end of the session, I will share a link to an online survey on how to receive a certificate of completion for the webinar. Today's webinar, Supporting EB/EL Achievement in English Only in Dual Language Classrooms, is brought to you by Renaissance. Our speakers today are Dr. Carol Johnson and Dr. Julie Vogel. Dr. Carol Johnson is a bilingual educator and international education officer at Renaissance. She holds a PhD in second language acquisition and teaching, specializing in how people learn second languages. Dr. Julie Vogel is a National Education Officer at Renaissance, and she was formerly Superintendent of Schools at the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, Texas, and Director of Instructional Services at the Diocese of Portland, Oregon. She is formerly a K-8 teacher, building principal, college professor, and associate dean. Thank you both for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Julie Vogel to lead us in prayer.
I'm going to show the PowerPoint, aren't I? Because it's on there. That's right.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am going to be leading us in prayer this afternoon. So while I get myself together for a moment, if you could all just take just a moment, settle in, put everything aside, take that 30 seconds to a minute to just center, and we'll begin. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Leadership is hard to define. Lord, let us be the ones to define it with justice. Leadership is like a handful of water. Lord, let us be the people to share it with those who thirst. Leadership is not about watching and correcting. Lord, let us remember it is about listening and connecting. Leadership is not about telling people what to do. Leadership, Lord, let us find out really what people want. Leadership is less about the love of power and more about the power of love. Lord, as we continue to undertake the role of leaders, let us be affirmed by the servant leadership we witness in your Son, Jesus. Let us walk in the path he has set and let those who will follow. Let our greatest passion be compassion, our greatest strength love, our greatest victor the reward of peace. In leading, let us never fail to follow. In loving, let us never fail. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. And welcome everyone to our webinar today. We are super excited to have you here and to be a part of your world today. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Carol, and she's going to go ahead and get us started.
I am. Oh, that's a lot to follow. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to be here with you. We're so happy to have been invited to be with you. And as you heard at the beginning, both Julie and I are part of Renaissance. And so we just are letting you know that up front. This is the title of today's presentation, Supporting EB/EL Achievement in English Only in Dual Language Classrooms. And as all of us know that are in the world of education, that's a huge title. So we're obviously going to narrow down in the presentation that we do today. But we want to do the best we can to represent both aspects of basic programming for students that are emerging bilinguals, English learners, be that either instruction in English only or two-way immersion, dual language, etc. And we start with our mission. So I'm going to ask Julie to read it because the truth is, just like prayer centers us everywhere, our mission centers us too. We think about it every day in the work that we do, and we also take that so very seriously. So Julie, you want it?
Yeah, I sure do. So the mission of Renaissance is to accelerate learning for all children and adults of all abilities, ability levels, and ethnic and social backgrounds worldwide. And the reason I like it and why I stumble over it is because always in my head, I think the mission of Renaissance in many ways also applies to the work that you do every single day in Catholic schools, because every single day in Catholic schools, we pride ourselves on seeing the face of God in every single face that looks back at us. And to me, in some way, shape, or form, our Renaissance mission also does the same, because we say accelerate learning for all, and all means all. Doesn't matter to me where you are, who you are, what you are, all means all, and I'm here for you. And so I love that. I think our mission in some ways can connect me back to that worldwide mission of what it means to see the face of God looking back at me and every human being I come into contact every day. So I take great pride in our mission and the way that I think it relates to the work that you do every single day.
Thank you, Julie. Gosh, it's hard to get emotional at the beginning of webinars and then, but this is a really important one and it matters because our kids matter so much to us. And as you can see, we also have the mission in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. Does anybody in the audience want to say it for us? Any volunteers? We have colleagues that do. It's just not me or Julie. And I promise you, you don't want to hear me say it. It's not pretty.
Do you want me to read it, Carol? I can read it.
Oh, Claudia, thank you.
Ok. Hasta la edad, el aprendizaje de todos los niños y adultos de todos los niveles de habilidad y antecedentes étnicos y sociales en todo el mundo.
And you can see, thank you, Claudia, so much. You can see we do this intentionally to make sure that we are speaking to everyone. We do everything possible to make sure we are inclusive in how we do our work and that everyone means everyone to us. Thank you, Claudia. So Julie and Claudia and I talked a lot about how we would frame this seminar. And we thought that for particularly me and Julie, we would start off. Can everybody hear me okay? You can hear me? Because I can't tell.
We're getting yes, and I can hear you just fine. So
okay, thank you. Thank you. So in this, I thought, okay, as Julie and I talked and then went over it with Claudia, I thought we kind of wanted to share with you our own experiences. And for me, this begins with my background going to Catholic school. And so this is one of those pictures from Catholic school. I went through the 1st through 8th grades. I will share with you that my parents couldn't afford tuition for high school after that. There were several of us in the family. And I wanted you to see that I literally walked that path to school each day. And that church, St. Joseph's, is still there today. And for me, in the work that I do, specifically in the field that I'm in, the coolest thing happened there. And that is, I'm old enough that Mass was in Latin, and we went all the time. And I also was exposed to French in the classroom. And I am a linguist professionally now today, and that began in Catholic school for me. So Julie, I'm going to move it on to you.
All right, so I have some interesting pictures here. And so I was not able to attend Catholic school growing up. And there's a really interesting story behind it. And it makes me happy to see how much things have changed in the Catholic world because of that. My oldest sibling, there's 5 of us, and like Carol, there's a lot of us, one right after the other. And my father was definitely went to Catholic schools his entire life in Iowa. But my oldest brother, Mike, was handicapped. And so he was cognitively delayed. And so things at school were very challenging for him. And the Catholic school couldn't take him because they couldn't provide the services that he needed in order to give him an outstanding education. So my dad said, you can't take him, you can't have the rest. It just isn't going to work for us as a family. And so I didn't get to go because they couldn't help Mike. And my dad was very clear that his mission in life was to do whatever he could to help Catholic schools be able to serve more and more children. And I'm happy to say that today, I think we are getting much more inclusive than we were in the past. But my 3 children all did attend Catholic school. So there they are. The first picture of the 3 of them together is when they were all young, when Sophie, the one in the middle, was maybe 5. And the picture on the right is the round circle with the arrow. That's where our house is. And so our kids jumped the fence to the playground to go to the Catholic school right behind us. And you can see the Catholic school where it says St. Clair School. And all 3 of them went to Catholic school there in Portland, Oregon, in the Archdiocese of Portland in Oregon. And then in high school, that's everybody's picture in 11th grade. And notice the boys don't have uniforms. Believe it or not, Jesuit Portland did not have uniforms. And so the boys didn't wear uniforms to school. But Sophia went to Incarnate Word Academy in Houston. And let me tell you, all the Catholic school kids in Houston wore uniforms. And so you can see pictures of her in her Catholic school uniform there. And really, people ask me all the time, what was the biggest benefit of sending your kids to Catholic school? And there's so many I can never tell you. But my favorite thing is that when my kids leave there and left Catholic school, they understood that it wasn't always about them, and that there are lots of people in this world, and being part of the echelon of children who have been blessed to have a Catholic education, it is our job to give back. And to this day, all three of them are involved in all kinds of things where they're continually giving back on their own as adults. So what I'm most proud of is that. They have an outstanding education, that's a given, but what I'm really proud of is who they are as people.
Mhm. That was really neat. That was really neat. Thank you. So we wanted to start then finding out about you. We want to know, do you have dual language classrooms, two-way, one-way, whatever the description is, or are you in English only classrooms? Because even though we're going to talk about both in the webinar, we thought we would get a sense from you of what your situation is.
So if you could just go ahead and put it in the chat, if you're an English only classroom, or you're part of a dual language, a two-way immersion, or whatever kind of classroom you're in, that would be great. Not seeing a whole lot. Oh, here we go. So an English only. So we've got one person who was brave enough to put it in the chat. Here we go. Now we're going. So we have some English only classroom, increasing number of students though in their English only who are first language is Spanish. So that's helpful because we're going to talk about that today. Immersion coordinator at Holy Cross Grade School in South Bend. Oh, what a great new title. I've never heard of an immersion coordinator. I love that. And then we have both. So Erica has both where she is dual language, and she has 90-10 to 50-50, and then English only. Some more English only. And and here's one that says they have 4,600 ELs in the Catholic system. That's wow. Oh my goodness. 90-10 dual language immersion in Salem, Oregon. Oh, really? So the Archdiocese of Portland. Yay, I was the associate superintendent there, very familiar with that area. And I knew they were starting a dual language school there. Happy to see that still going strong. Makes me happy. So thank you for chiming in about who we are. So we have both, Carol. We have everybody.
So we have a variety. That's terrific. Thank you for sharing, because it's kind of scary, right? To do that, you have to be brave to do that in these webinars. And so we appreciate that so much, because it's scary for us too, being the ones on the other end. And so we feel more connected to you when you are doing that too. So in writing this presentation, I thought, well, I would kind of like to know, where are the Catholic schools? What does the distribution look like today? And I'm hoping that's today. I went to Dr. Google for that. And then I wanted to also look at what schools were either dual language two-way immersion. There, we know they have different titles, but you can see both are spread across the country. And so that was like, that is cool. That makes sense to me. I get all of that. But the other thing was, I was just really pleasantly surprised at how many are dual language and or two-way immersion, because those are hard programs to establish and run and have the resources and all of that. So this was very exciting to me. And the neatest thing about it was that, given all the prevalence of emerging bilinguals, English learners in our schools today, in your schools today, you're obviously working really hard to meet their needs no matter what the program is. And so that's kind of our goal in this webinar today, is to make sure we share with you what we think would be useful to you to add to either your information, your knowledge base, and perhaps resources that you might consider. So that's the premise that we're going to go from today. And in doing that, then, since I'm the linguist between us, I'm the one that's going to do most of this, just to give you a heads up on that. But please feel free to jump in at any time in the chat with a question. Julie or Claudia will jump in and answer, immediately bring it up. Or Julie or Claudia, if you have something where I have forgotten something, please jump in. So just wanted to be upfront about that. All right, so here are the 4 topics. Notice I didn't clear out the add information here, because I thought about it and I thought, that'll happen as we go along. Comprehensible input, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about vocabulary and background knowledge. We're going to talk about English only or two-way immersion, dual language, whichever you call it. Because for me, candidly, they generally mean the same thing. And then we're going to talk from a little bit bigger picture about supporting the curriculum that you may have. And literally, I'm going to go through those 4 topics. So the reason I start always with comprehensible input is this. We acquire language when we understand what we hear or read. We have to understand the language that we are exposed to in order to acquire more language. And the students that we're focusing on today are students who are in the position of learning English, adding English to their language repertoire, if you will. And the way that occurs is not by just a lot of language, but by making sure when possible that what we expose them to is comprehensible. Here's the example I usually give. My second language is French. My very, very poor third language is Spanish. And I'm telling you the truth, very embarrassed by that, how poorly I performed in that. But having said that, what I like to say for my own experience and how I talk about comprehensible input is that I like to say, so if my family and I go out to dinner at a restaurant and the family next to us is speaking Japanese, and we don't speak or understand Japanese, none of that language is comprehensible input to us. It is to them, but it's not to us. And therefore, we are not learning any more language from that. And so that's why for our students, it's so important that we understand the critical need for making every input opportunity that's possible comprehensible. And that's why I start there. And here's the thing we need to know. Oral language proficiency that students come to school with is one of the foundations of their literacy development. So in your students' classrooms where the instruction is English only, if they walk in with English oral language proficiency, dynamite. Then you can build right from that into the foundations of English literacy. However, if they walk in with another oral language literacy, they walk in speaking Spanish or Vietnamese or some other language, that is still a foundation for literacy, but it's going to be another foundation that they're going to have to build in English if you want them to achieve literacy in English. Now, if your goal is a dual language program and you're looking for literacy in both languages, that's super. And it's still actually the same concept though. So just like to start with that. That's what students bring to us everywhere. That's what they bring to us. And the reason that matters, that we understand that, is the oral language they bring to us actually sets the ceiling on comprehension for reading right now. So if we read something to them that they do not understand orally, they may not understand it. So again, think about why we don't read 5th grade books to 1st graders, because 5th grade text is not comprehensible to first grade students. They don't have that oral comprehension for 5th grade material. And it is the same thing across languages. Does that make sense? All right. And this I just wanted to give as an example. So when we talk about comprehensible input, it varies depending upon the proficiency level by language. Notice that I have 3 different English versions of the same topic here. Text that is comprehensible to students at different levels. You can see actually by the quantity of the text on the English ones, where is the simplicity and where is the complexity. This is all about rainforests. But at the very last minute, I decided to put in an example of Spanish. Same topic. Not a lot of language in that. And the reason I decided to put that in there is because it isn't about quantity of language. It's about complexity and vocabulary of language that determines comprehensibility. So it's really important that we get this before I go on and show you what we would say would be done to make this better for our students. And one of the things that I personally have experienced as a language learner, and I'm going to tell you my sins as a language teacher, is I used to think that if I gave students grade level books in English with a dictionary, that was comprehensible input. You can only look up so many words before it becomes incomprehensible to you. And through this presentation, what I'm going to do is give you an example of why that's not okay most of the time.
In the chat, Rich mentioned that he's noticed that most of their monolingual students.
Say it again, I can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me?
Just barely. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I don't know what's
Okay.
going on here. Am
Huh.
I not using my teacher voice? Is that any better?
Yes, that's better.
All right, so I've noticed that he says that most of their monolingual students get their conversational output from informal, non-academic, comprehensible input from the playground and lunchroom and the after-school programs. Does that make sense to you? So they would get more of their shared vocabulary from each other to get their comprehensible input and output?
They are. So that playground language quickly becomes comprehensible to them.
Okay.
It very quickly does. There's a lot of repetition in it. It's not a lot of real complex language like you would see in literature. And so that is
academic
literally,
in its orientation.
is it academic in nature?
So is the language not as academic on the playground?
Oh, it's not. Of course not. Yeah. They're not likely out there talking about Shakespeare when they're going up and down the slide, especially little kids, smaller kids, younger kids. So yeah, but that's a really good point. That becomes comprehensible to them pretty quickly. Okay, that conversational language. Yes, and it does so a lot of because context is always there for them. Okay, it's not real abstract, and there's a lot of repetition of it. So those things help in developing conversational language. Absolutely. Absolutely. The challenge, I would argue, in teaching students who are learning content while learning language, the challenge is getting them over to the content side, because that is really hard, really hard. It's a lot of work and a lot of language. And the reason I brought this next quote up for you is that it's important then to know, well, okay, how do we in fact facilitate the development of more language? Because more language means we can achieve at higher levels. And this is really, really, Lee and Van Patten are really good researchers in the acquisition, the development of language. 2 or 3 decades of this work from them. I just want you to know. And what they really go through is the only way it happens is by keeping learners in the flow. So that would happen on the playground too. Think about through meaningful, that's meaningful to students on the playground. It's interesting. They're with their peers. They're all playing, doing this, similar things. It has to be level appropriate and age appropriate. And in fact, on the playground it is. And it has to be comprehensible. And that is how it develops. Our goal is to take it from the conversational language to the language of school so that they can achieve in the content areas. So again, for me, this, oh, I see. It's a comprehensible thing. And I made the mistakes myself of giving students books and dictionaries. I made the mistakes of giving students videos to watch that I thought were so good, but were not at their level. And therefore, except for what they could see in a video, they didn't learn more language. I personally made all those mistakes. I have to tell you that. And for that reason, began to really search for, what do we really need to know? What don't I know? And I really originally, for early on in my teaching career, teaching language learners, just so you know, that's my whole teaching career, is that I came to the conclusion that I was really bad at that because I didn't see them making a lot of gains. And for me, I think like for all of us that are teachers, we want our students to make gains. So that sent me on this. And Julie, you want that one?
Sure. You may have to quit. I'm not sure what. Okay, so one of the things that I can share with you is that I was in CEA conference last year in Dallas and sitting there listening to one of the presentations. And one of the teachers said, I really just need to have some skills so that I can help my kids who don't speak English as their first language. I'm frustrated not at them, but at myself because I don't have anything to draw on that is going to help me access and reach these kids. And she was truly devastated, and it was really kind of interesting because these things matter, right? We're sitting here in classrooms, we're working with kids every day, and we may not have everything that we need to do that. And so we know we have core curriculum materials that we have to use in our classrooms. They're there. That's what we're supposed to use to teach our children. But if English isn't their first language, they're going to have some real trouble trying to access any of that curriculum. And if Carol's right, these comprehensible inputs, if they're coming in with English as their second language and another language as their first, this is going to be really hard. And I always think back to me teaching fifth grade, and we had a young man come to us because his parents were fleeing a country that was war torn. And so they sought asylum in the United States and lived in Yugoslavia. He did not speak a word of English. And I've never felt more at a loss as a fellow human trying to help this poor young man in my classroom be successful. We had I had absolutely no skill, no materials, and no way for him to access language in a way that could help him learn. I just thank goodness that he was super smart and able to pick things up really quickly, that the kids in the classroom were able to help him with miscuing on basic things, and he made friends. So kids coming in without that comprehensible input, solid in English, are really going to struggle accessing to things that are ways of help them. And they only get bits and pieces. And so that means they're going to have some gaps in their education. So anything we can do to help fill in that piece for them and fill in those gaps, I think is going to be and I do not consider myself an expert at parallels in this concept, but what we've talked about all the time with Renaissance is you may not be the expert, but you can't sit around and wait when you know there are thousands of kids who are depending on you to learn everything you can and try everything you can every single day.
We agree completely.
Okay, so my audio is making people crazy. So I'm gonna see what I can do about it, Carol, while we move on.
Okay, and I'll go forward then. Okay. Okay, so from that, I want to go to vocabulary and background knowledge. And ask yourselves, you can put it in the chat. I'm watching the clock to make sure we're okay. How many words out of 100 do you think a reader has to already know, that's already, to understand a text? Because this is the answer to what is comprehensible. So in the chat, think out of 100 words, how many do you think the reader has to already know?
So can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Can you see the chat okay?
Yes, in the chat, they're saying 65, 75, 85, 50 plus.
Excellent guesses. Excellent. And your sound is much better now, by the way. Excellent guesses. So here's what the research says. The percent of vocabulary to facilitate reading comprehension. There's lots of research on this. I like this study the best, and that's why it's the one I present. The research says you have to already know 90 to 98% of the words in a text to comprehend. That is the same for native speakers as it is for second language learners. The research also says if you know less than 80% of the words, don't bother. That's my, that's my statement with it. They're a little nicer about it, but it's a fact. And that's the point where usually in my case, I would give my students a dictionary, or as a language learner myself, I would be given a dictionary. And that is called looking up words. That is not comprehension. You lose all flow and all ability to connect dots. So I would like for you to experience this, because I think it will be surprising to you. It was to me the first time I actually set this up. So this is a third grade passage from a third grade English textbook. This is what it looks like if you know 80% of the words And of those words, think language learner, you know the first 1,000 most frequently used words in English. So you know all the high frequency words. Think about it that way. Now, do remember you're educated and you can guess, but think about being a younger student. Okay, so you already have a sense of what this is about. There's no question. But could you pass a comprehension test on it? With what you get out of this, depends on the question, right? How many days to the sun? You know, I could get a multiple choice on that one. And again, I know what this is about, and so do you. But students are learning content and vocabulary. So there's 80%. And you can see, if they had to sit with a dictionary, they would just be looking up words over and over. And granted, some of them are duplicates. But still, notice how disjointed this is. Nothing flows. There's 85%. Notice I've added in the words that if you know another 1,000 most frequently used words in English, these are the words that you would get now.
There's still a couple sentences I don't get.
Correct. Correct. And think about that. That's all you get from another 1,000 words, because in fact, high frequency words are used with high frequency, but they are surrounded by all the other words. But when we teach our students, we go right after high frequency words first as much as possible, of course, for that reason. But I've also noticed I put the word top in pink. And the reason I did that, the others are just in blue. I wanted you to go see the flow. Okay, the reason I did that is because not only is it the word top, but it's not the most frequently used meaning of the word top. It's a secondary meaning of top. It's one of these. Now, think about that for English learners. Just consider that. Now, let's go one step further. This is if you know 95% of the words. Now, you still do not know every word. And I have put up there on the screen for you the words that are missing. And I want you to look at those and go, okay, 3 out of 4. Oh, those are academic words anyway. Those would be keywords in a science book for my students, any students. They're going to learn that with the rest of the class. In fact, 2 of them are the verb rotate with the, different conjugation. Super. Until you see the word tetherball. Really? That's on nobody's list anywhere. And so I just wanted to give a sense of why it being comprehensible matters. The student doesn't have to know tetherball to survive this passage. The student now, in fact, can read this passage, understand it. Are there a couple of gaps up there? Yes, but that's what's going to be taught in the classroom. The fact is, the rest of the words are not likely going to be taught to native speakers in the classroom. So I just wanted to give a sense of that, because usually for people who've not experienced life as a second language learner, and if you haven't, I want you to know this is what it's like. Sitting in a classroom, and I myself have done it many times as a French as a second language speaker, sit in the classroom and I am grasping for words as they're flying by, picking up the ones I understand and all the rest go past me. No, this is what happens to our students. So facilitating comprehensible input is really important. And there's one other thing that's really important, and it's background knowledge. Now, there are lots of studies on the effect of not just vocabulary, but background knowledge in terms of understanding what we hear or what we're reading. This one is one of my favorite ones. I'm now at a point where I just present the ones that I think are the most impactful and cut to the chase for presentations. This one I like because A, it's something concrete and we can all talk about it. B, it was actually done on second language learners. Okay, so this is not native speakers of English. This is second language learners. And the way this study ran was this. The researchers decided that they were going to take about 600 students. Well, this was about 600 students in this study. And they decided they wanted to separate students by whether they were good generic readers, you see my air quotes here, or poor generic readers, meaning on some reading test, Okay, that was the first separation. The second separation was, did the students know a lot about soccer? Because what they're going to read is about soccer, or not a lot about soccer. And because they really want to find out what matters more, your generic global reading ability or your knowledge of what you're reading. They did this with the 600 students who were in grades 3, 5, and 7. I'm just putting 3 and 7 up here because, after that, there's no more screen space. But it's the same exact thing happened in the 5th grade. All 3 grades read the same passage. And all 3 grades were given 20 comprehension questions afterward, multiple choice comprehension questions. Okay. So I want you to look first at grade 3. High soccer knowledge. Does it matter if they're a good reader or a poor reader? Same outcome. Knowledge. Look at low soccer knowledge. Did it help that they were a good reader versus a poor reader? No. So look at grade 7. Same exact pattern. And the conclusion that they came to is, yes, we need to know, as a student, a good reader versus a poor reader overall, globally. But what we all are is really good readers and poor readers, depending on our background knowledge. For example, I can read anything in linguistics. Of course I can. But if you hand me something beyond a freshman in college textbook on physics, I'm in trouble. I have no background there. And that's what this study says. So the thing that we have to keep in mind for our students, all students, but particularly emerging bilinguals, English learners, is that yes, you have to facilitate vocabulary and background knowledge. So I just want to make sure that that's in there for you, because those things are really important. And some of us take, decades to get to this information because we weren't taught it in our classrooms. And I was taught neither of this all the way through a PhD. Just want you to know this is all my own learning after the fact and my own failures as a language teacher. What am I doing wrong? Okay, this is about you. Keep in mind as I go through this, are you in an English only instructional setting or two-way, dual language, whatever term you use? I just didn't want to put all the terms, but I want you to know that that's what that refers to. Okay, we're good on time. So I'm going to start with English only instruction. And I'm just going to do a sample student to keep in mind, to keep this like where, if I keep the basics in mind, you will be able to then generalize this to your situation, because I won't know all of those, but you do. And so that's the beauty of this. So I say, okay, I've got a student, a grade 5 student. He's either in English only instruction or two-way immersion, dual language, whatever. Well, if he's in English only instruction, that's what I'm looking at on the left. For me to really facilitate helping the student, I need to know, seriously, I do need to know his English language proficiency level and what does that mean? What does that sound like, look like, etc. I do want you to know, because I saw after looking at the map of two-way immersion schools that I chose Texas language standards and Texas art standards as my example, because there were a lot of schools there of your schools in Texas. But please know you know this for wherever you're located. So I say, okay, I know this student, 5th grade student, is intermediate in TELPAS, that's their English language proficiency label in Texas. And he somehow needs to achieve their grade 5 English language arts. Okay, this is English only instruction. And I also need to know, because I'm going to offer comprehensible input to him, his reading range. Now at Renaissance, we call that a ZPD, the zone of proximal development. And I'm going to tell you that if you give a general reading test, that you can find this in some way. We do that with our STAR products, but I want you to imagine that this student can read in English at a second grade, somewhere between a 2nd grade 6th month and a 3rd grade 6th month text with comprehension. Okay, so he's a 5th grade student. You can see that he's, good 2 years behind on reading level. Okay, so that's English only instruction. That's what I'm going to argue I would need to know to be able to meet the needs of this student in my classroom. If it's a two-way immersion classroom, notice I've added something. Okay, added a couple things. Notice I still have the English language proficiency to deal with. I have language arts both in English and Spanish. Notice that. And in this two-way, I'm assuming that his home language is Spanish. If you have two-way where you have native English speakers in those programs also, then you would need to know, you know what I'm saying, Spanish language proficiency. You would want to know that. I have his reading range in English still, and now I have his reading range in Spanish. All of these pieces of information help me understand what it is I need to do to provide this student with comprehensible input in either program. Okay, so it works in either program, that kind of the same way. There's just, as we know in dual language, we've got that another language to also support.
Carol,
So yes,
before we move on, I can't see it, but Claudia can, and she said that Rich Hernandez had his hand up. I'm not
Rich,
sure.
say it again.
Rich may have a question.
Okay,
I'm
can
not
you
sure
say the
how to-
question? Can you read the question then? Does Claudia have the question?
I just allowed Rich to talk if he wanted
Oh,
to
perfect.
unmute, excuse me, and ask his question. He is welcome to.
Are you there, Rich? I can't hear Rich if he is, can anybody hear him if he's giving the question?
No, I don't believe so.
Oh,
All right, so
darn.
we'll come back
Oh,
to Rich.
he does not have a question. He just
Okay.
chatted, so we're good.
Okay.
Oh, okay,
All right,
okay.
we're good.
Okay, good. Thank you for doing that. Okay, so now let's go to your curriculum and how are you going to deal with all that stuff that I just showed you? Okay, I mean, because that, at the end of the day, got to make it into your classroom. That was nice, nice little chart I gave you and all of that, but what are you going to do with that? So I want you to know what I've learned to do with it. I actually go in and describe for myself for the English only. You can see I've described the language proficiency. What does that mean for a student at the intermediate level? That's Texas's description, okay? Whatever language proficiency assessment you use, you can use that as the description and you'll know what to do. For language arts, I'm going, okay, 5th grade language arts, what relates to this that would make sense that I could connect to the language proficiency? Okay, go back and look at that. And I filled all this in, going through just what I'm sharing with you today. Okay, this was not filled in by someone else. I've gone through this, but then I went to the science standard. I thought, I think that time is really short. And I thought, what if I connect the science standard? It could be another subject area too. But what if I look at one more standard and look at science and say, what do I have to do in that class? I mean, in that course, subject matter. And could I connect these together so that I'm efficient in what I'm doing? Because time is of the essence, as you know. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So I said, okay, my 5th grade science standard I'm working on right now, and pretend like I went to a textbook, although I didn't. I went to their science standards online because I don't have their textbooks. But I said, oh, okay, in science 5th grade now, the science standard I'm working on is, I have to compare the structures and functions of different species. Okay, and it gave the rest of the description. I've got it in red, the big stuff I want to see. Then I actually did it backing up. I want you to know I backed into it. I went, oh, now I see that for language arts, I'm focusing here on reading and vocabulary. It could be the other skills, but for my example, I'm giving you that. And then I'm going, oh, and newly acquired vocabulary. So notice I've got reading, a receptive skill, I've got vocabulary building, and I've got actually a productive skill in that the students are going to use newly acquired vocabulary. Wow. And then I need to back it up and see what are the forms and functions required for my students who are still learning English to achieve that. So the form I'm going to go after is adjectives. And because this student is at an intermediate level, I'm not going to go after, the everyday high frequency adjectives, good, bad, short, tall. I'm going to make the assumption that they know those already, but this is an opportunity to go for lower frequency vocabulary adjectives. Okay, and that's how we're going to work on this. And then for the function, notice this comes right from the science description. Oh, they're going to describe, and it's a compare and contrast. Okay, this sets me up to do some work now. And I want you to know I spent time thinking this through, but I also want you to know that once you get this process in place, this now becomes really an efficient way of doing it. Because now you know with your resources you have in your classroom what you're going to do. I just did the same exact thing here, only added in Spanish language arts. Notice that for two-way immersion. Because the science standard is going to be the same. Okay, they're still working on English language proficiency. The language arts standard is still the same for that grade. This is Texas has Spanish language arts standards also. Okay, so notice I've got an authentic reading. Got it. Okay, and academic vocabulary. See how this all now works together for me. And again, I'm back to don't ever lose sight of this. It's comprehensible input that matters above all. So anybody learning processes for meaning before they ever notice form, and I say that because the form we're going to work on is adjectives and compare and contrast. So they have to have meaning in place first. And notice they actually process content words before that. Okay, so this is all really helpful. It's the concrete that the brain goes after first in terms of getting meaning out of something. Otherwise, it's an abstract, and you don't want to waste time with I don't mean abstract thought. I mean, it's just an abstract in that I can't really connect to it and work with it because I don't yet have enough language. And the way I do it as an example for Renaissance is I show examples from our digital series library called Mayan. I show digital books that can be used for this purpose. Now, if you have other ones, you can use that too. And while they don't have to be digital, the advantage to digital is that they usually have auditory and tools to go with them that will facilitate this activity for your students without a lot of extra resources required. So in this is the topic from science. There were hundreds of books, by the way, in this Mayan digital library on this topic, but I chose four. I know his English reading range. Remember, I have that up there. You can see it to remind myself. And I looked at the 1.6, that would be first grade 6th month. I have a second grade 9th month, and I have a third grade 2nd month, and I have a Spanish one on the side, which we will get back to. But I want you to see I first went and pulled that. And now this in itself took me less than 5 minutes, just so you know. And for my example, I want to show you that I'm going to work off this book. It sits right in his reading range, and it should be fairly comprehensible to him. That's the goal. So I'm just going to show you a couple of pages inside, just so you know. This is the first page inside. You can see that there's not a lot of text. You can see it's high frequency words. You can see it's English. You can see that there's some content, academic words in there, adaptations. You can see all of that, and all of that connects to, in fact, the science standard that we're talking about. What I'm going to ask the student to do is to read and understand, and that means listen to also, because this has audio with it. And then I'm going to give them assignments to focus on the form, and I'm going to give them a function to do. And I do this for one reason. It's not enough to just come in and pay attention to this or, let it go by. This has to be active for students for it to stick. And we want it to stick. That means we want it to go from short-term to long-term memory, and that means working with it. All right, so here's another page from the same book. Just want you to see it's not a lot of text, but now notice the low frequency adjectives. And here are the assignments I've asked the student to do using the tools. I have them highlighting for themselves new adjectives to them. Low frequency adjectives can be different to different students. This is individual because each student has his own sign-on. I also have asked students to create a journal for their adjectives. See, it has a tab there that says adjectives on the left, and they've entered them into this. And so this gives them, notice the amount of work they're doing with this. They're always interacting with it because that's really important. What's not obvious on this journal tool that I've created here for the students, I've had them create, sorry, I created it to show you. What's not obvious is that I also ask students to alphabetize any words they put in there. The reason that's important is because this is not going to be just a list of new words to the student, which we've all done that with little notebooks, write down the new words you're learning. Well, candidly, I'm going to tell you, neither I nor my students ever go back to those lists because they're random. There's nothing, cohesive to them to let me know where I did that, where I found that, etc. So alphabetizing is huge because this adjective tool, this journal that's adjectives, goes with the student through every book the student ever reads in this system. The other beauty of this is once the student goes, oh, that's silky, I know that word, they can delete it. And so that prevents the list from being pages long, which is useless. The last thing I ask the student to do is to make some notes. And the notes can come right off what they read. Because at the end of the day, that science standard is asking students to compare and contrast the features, the adaptive features of animals. All right, so you can see this, and students do this really well, really well. One other thing, they can actually copy and paste if they choose to from Google Translate individual words and make it a bilingual dictionary. Just want you to know that. Lots of students do that, and the beauty of that is that means you're not just limited to something that uses the same alphabetic language and keyboard we use. All right, here's the next page. You can see there's another one here. I'm just showing you this is the word, this is what's going on, and the vocabulary will tend to repeat because that's what this book is about, a specific thing. And here, this is what I love about this is the opportunity to then interact with the student, go, oh, web-footed, feet is an irregular plural. Notice it could be web feet. It just allows for conversation with the student, and it's not overwhelming to the student, and it is minimal work for the teacher. All right. So I'm going to go back and show you again, comprehensible input, English only or dual, doesn't matter. Those were the 4 columns I gave you before. Now let's go to Spanish. Notice it's a higher level. Oh, look, I messed up his reading level. My bad. His reading level is 4.0 to 6.0. I happen to know because I looked it up for this student that I have as a sample student, but I forgot to type it up there. Apologies. This is the difference in what it looks like now. Think about that in your dual language classrooms. If your students are in English only classrooms and you want them to continue raising their Spanish at home, I want you to know again, this can be listening also, in which case they could go home and build more language in Spanish too. And it can be done very quickly and very efficiently. I just wanted to share you that as an option, but dual language, it's obvious.
So
Same thing though.
Carol, can I chime in here? Can you hear
Of
me?
course.
So let me make sure I'm understanding this right. So, because I think there might be other people in this webinar today who are newer to this like me, and we're learning right
Sure.
along with you. So the important thing is that you gave it to him first in English at a reading level that he could get the comprehensible input, right?
Correct.
And so now, to increase his background knowledge at the same time, you're also giving it to him in Spanish, which is this child's first language, that he can read at this level, so that he can still get the same background language that is closer to what is that 5th grade curriculum?
Well,
standard?
yes and no. So let's talk about English only class instruction versus dual language.
All right.
English only instruction, I personally, not saying you have to, you guys have to, I would have the student go home and listen to this at his
In
typical
Spanish.
level of language level in Spanish. In an English only classroom, the student is likely not to have been taught decoding in Spanish. And while it's much easier than decoding in English, if the student doesn't have that skill in place, listening is still the way to go. So yes, then you are building knowledge like a 10-year-old,
Mhm.
while English is building that way.
So you can still build them both up at the same time.
You can. Lots of people are uncomfortable with that, but I happen to think it's a really good thing to do. The second reason for it in the English only instruction is look at all the cognates, the words that look the same from one language to another or very similar. So ironically, this is the opportunity to build academic language indirectly that applies to English also, just by seeing it. Okay, if you can decode. Dual language programs, they're going to have them read this. Okay, they're going to be reading in Spanish because they're developing literacy in Spanish also. Does that make sense to people? Yeah. Okay, because this is amazing. This is amazing as a tool. And there are other companies that make this. Please don't misunderstand, but this is an amazing way to go. You have to provide comprehensible input. And I learned early on as the teacher, I can't talk forever and give enough comprehensible input anyway. It's not possible. quantity does matter. So here's Julie. We're back to Julie again. Thank you, Julie.
So if I'm understanding you right, and I think I am, we have to start where kids are at. No matter what we do, step number one is to figure out where they're at with their, in both languages. Figure out where they are so you know how to start. And we have to remember that we can't just practice and do. So your idea about what you said with your cardinal thing where you gave kids the book and the dictionary. Oh, I'm like, I don't know if I should openly admit that, but I was a teacher a long time ago, so I did not have the skill set that I think teachers come with that. So it does have to be the right kind of practice at the right time. So if we had given him a book or given the student a book that was at a level that he couldn't get the comprehensible input, it would have been a waste of everybody. Right?
And that is so perfect. And think of the slide that was early on where it was about rainforests, and there were 4 different versions. Of course, one of them was Spanish. The one on the far right was the most complex language and the most language. That was actually 5th grade. So if you have so that's not comprehensible to the student who reads at somewhere between 2nd and 3rd grade level learning English.
So if we want them to read it in English, we need to give it at the right level in English where they can get the comprehensible input, but it doesn't mean we're skipping out on the comprehension side, because they can go home and listen to it in Spanish, maybe at a higher level.
They can, of course.
And that will
they
help
absolutely can.
background knowledge at the same time. So you're building the background knowledge, so they're keeping up and they're not falling farther behind, because you're building their background knowledge in a language that comes easily to them.
Well, it's theirs. It's their language.
So while they're learning it.
Yeah. And the reality is the only way to bring the English up to the age that they are is to continue as they gain more language because of comprehensible input. They grow in language and they grow in reading. All of that is the effect of that. Yeah. It's really hard work. Make no mistake. It is hard work and it is so rewarding.
Mhm.
So to kind of wrap up, just so you guys know, these are the things that the company that we work for offers in both English and Spanish. We just decided we would put it on the screen for you and you could see it. Because we think it's really important. Wherever you get your resources, you know what you need, but we wanted to share that with you. And we also want to share with you all the references because we think we owe you that too. And so we are happy to send this out to you so that you can have this. You can check any of it out that you wish. And we're really happy to have had this time with you today. I'm not sure how we're doing on time. Are we a decent?
We have time for a couple of questions if anyone has any, but I think we're close to the end, right, Jessica?
Yep, we've got just a few minutes here.
They're having a hard time hearing me still.
While you type in your questions, I'm going to go ahead and drop a survey in the chat as well for your certificate of attendance. So if you could go ahead and complete that. They do have a question for you. Julie, did you want to read that one?
Sure. It says, are you aware of materials for the Super Kids program to support ELL? I do like the Super Kids program, but I don't know what they have for ELL. Do you, Carol?
I don't.
Super Kids is a really great reading program, but I don't know what they have for Spanish. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm just gonna lay it out there. I don't even know, I have no knowledge of the Super Kids program. However, is it is it graded readers? What is it? If you describe it for me. Let's talk about the English part of it anyway, if it's only English.
It's a K2, like, I would say basal reading program. Super Kids.
Okay, it
Yeah.
still comes, and are they leveled by then they're leveled by grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a
Are they
level.
meant to be teaching or foundational literacy skills also?
Yes.
Okay, so they're for English. So let's
it's
talk about that. Yeah, let's talk about that 5th grade, but they're written for native English speakers.
Yes.
Okay, frequently, I'm just going to be honest and tell you, vocabulary is frequently a challenge for non-native speakers. I would look at them and get a sense yourself. I mean, what does the vocabulary look like in them? And I say that because sometimes, okay, I'm just going to say this. Sometimes there are phonics programs that teach phonics with words that English learners or emerging bilinguals don't yet know. And they can master the phonics part, but not the comprehension part because they don't know the word. So just pay attention. If it's helping master phonics, super. And if you don't see comprehension, then you need to address that too. And that's how I would say it. Nobody wants to just sound out words. I can sound out, hey, I can do phonics in German, Italian, Spanish, but I can't read them. I can't comprehend them. So that's why understanding both components is the way to go.
That's it for questions.
Okay, well, I do want to thank you all, the Renaissance team, for being here. This was great information. I love hearing about it personally. So just thank you guys for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, NCEA. We're here to support our Catholic school teachers and leaders however we can. If there's anything you need, you know how to get a hold of us. We're all the same. Julie.vogel@renaissance.com, Carol.johnson@renaissance.com. If you have any questions or there's anything we can help you with, please don't hesitate to reach out. Keep up the great work and seeing the face of God in every single child that you work with.
Thank you very much, Renaissance team. And for all of those you watching, we did record the webinar and it will be sent out as well for you to share with your colleagues. I hope everybody has a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.